The three branches of philosophy are metaphysics, epistemology, and axiology. Metaphysics, in my opinion, is the broadest of the three, and it basically simply studies why things are the way they are. It focuses on reality and questions what reality is, what's the meaning of life, what does our existence mean. It's those deep, thought provoking questions that we'll never have an answer to. And that's the reason why it's so significant, is because those are concepts and answer questions that we will never have answers to, nor can prove and can't experience in our everyday life. Secondly, epistemology focuses on how humans acquire knowledge and we learn about reality. It's significant due to the fact that it basically questions how we think, why we think the way we think, and how we gain and apply new knowledge into our everyday lives. Lastly, axiology focuses on the study of value and questions what makes something valuable, what deems something valuable, what's considered valuable, and how do you place value on something. This branch of philosophy, I believe, is the most significant, is because, in my opinion, it focuses more on ethics rather than morals comparatively to the other two. When it comes to my own education, I have seen these three branches played out in several different scenarios. The first example I have is regarding metaphysics. Throughout college, I took a few philosophy classes purely on interest. I remember the very first class I took, my professor paired us randomly with other students, and the first question within the first 20 seconds of this class, he asked, "What is the meaning of life?" And I feel like we've all had those discussions before with whether it's friends or family, but also at the same time, that's a question that can and will never get answered and is so deep and thought provoking that it could be a little overwhelming to think about. But we all start talking, and we all, in our opinion, did some deep philosophical thinking with complete strangers. And the professor basically ended the conversation after a few minutes and listed every single answer that he heard us say. And he basically all called it non answers. And the very last day of that semester, he asked us the same question. And we were able, with what we had learned that semester, all had very, very different answers. And his whole deal was that he wanted us to be able to dig deeper and have an understanding of what we think life means, because it's not something that we will ever know the answer to. When thinking about epistemological questions, I think back to English class a lot. Every book we would read, in whether it's middle school, high school, whatever, we would read a few chapters of a book. We would go to school the next day, and our teacher would call on a random student or students and basically ask them their interpretation of what happened in the chapters, what happened or what was said between these two characters. And every teacher would always say this, and it always annoyed every student, I'm sure, is that there is no right or wrong answer. And as a student, you don't believe that. There has to be a right or wrong answer. But epistemology, which is also known as the theory of knowledge, and that's from Reicher 2003, questions sources of knowledge and how we understand text. It shapes an understanding for me because at the end of the day, every student is reading the same chapters, reading the same language, reading the same book. But we all come away with different understandings and interpretations based on possible different associations that we may have or perspectives that we may bring to the text. Lastly, the first example of axiology aspects in school that I could think of is from day one in kindergarten. We learn what being inclusive and being respectful is all about. Whether it's learning how to share toys, not call each other names, or including people in playtime or group projects. In my opinion, I think it's incredibly easy to tell 5-year-olds to share their toys, be nice, and be kind to everyone, and so on. However, I truly believe that as we get older, it gets harder. we gain our own perspectives, our own morals, our own ethics, and our own experience that shape us into who we are and what we say and do and how we act. And I think that makes it harder to share your toys and include people. As I got older, I started to think about the possibility of becoming a teacher, and I always thought about the values and the culture I would want to institute in my own classroom and the environment I would try to create to make sure these axiological values carry through as much as possible without even hopefully realizing it. A way I would incorporate metaphysical concepts into the classroom would most likely be through using critical thinking tactics and open ended response problems. And it would, I feel, allow room for students to get creative with their answers and force them to dig deeper into their reasonings. When thinking about ways that I would use epistemological theories to enhance my teaching, I would most likely take into account a tactic that Dr. Majid Abdallah writes about, which is called metacognitive strategies, which encourages students to try different learning strategies and reflect on their learning process, and that's from Abdallah 2023. Lastly, when thinking about axiology's role in education, in my opinion, it serves as a very fine line for teachers because our goal is to not influence our students into our ways of thinking rather than fostering an environment where the students can create their own. The way I would try to embed these values into my curriculum is along the lines of what Babita Tomar mentions in her writing, which she states that the idea of teaching lessons as realistically as possible. And she, in her book, states that the teacher must never impose ethical codes or standards of behavior. These should arise out of from social situations and the pupil's evaluating of his own behavior, and that's from Tomar 2014. In my opinion, this is a totally plausible way to incorporate axiology into my curriculum without influencing my own beliefs and allowing room for students to create their own.